I'm a semi-retired UU minister. I've been doing parish and community ministry for about 25, 30 years. I used to say retired, but now I have to say semi-retired because I took on the job of being coordinator of a new project called Unitarian Universalist Class Conversations. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Actually, Kate asked me to do it. She suggested it. I also lead workshops on becoming women of wisdom. And you'll see flyers for class conversations and the workshop, which is in Haverhill. No, it's in Andover. And you'll see those downstairs right next to where the Meeting House News is on that table with all the flyers. And then in my spare time, what my real project for retirement is writing a book about the 1960s. And I keep trying to make progress on that. I want to get it out before all the 50th anniversaries are over. It feels like we are eyeing one another across a great divide. A divide I sometimes call class, race, ethnocentricity, theological perspective, and the implications of how we practice, how we live, how we be. If you be you, and I be me, if we speak truth in love with love, if we act, relate with integrity, if we unite our spirits open and aching and whole and wanting and giving, then the work we engage, the communities we create, the power of who we can be holds a great promise, a great hope for us and our wider communities. And this matters. So the theme of this service you've already picked up is about class. But we also have something else happening that's very important, and that is that the seasons have shifted, and it is now spring. Even if it may feel like it's not spring, spring is really, it's a turning of the light, and we had a day of almost equal light and dark, and now every day from now on, for the next few months, it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. And so in honor of that, for our prayer and meditation today, I wanted to actually just kind of read the words of Jim Scott's song, Oneness of Everything, in honor of the earth that is the source of all of our lives. So let us gather together in a spirit of prayer and meditation, and we'll follow the words with a time of silence, and then we'll sing and just remain seated, Spirit of Life. The words are in your program. So let us gather ourselves together and take a deep breath and feel our connection with the earth. Far beyond the grasp of hands or light to meet the eye, past the reaches of the mind, there find the key to nature's harmony in architecture so entwined. Peace is in the dance of trees who stir before the first breath of wind is yet perceived. Trust in the song, becoming one with the dance, and all mysteries can be believed. Still we seek to find a truth that we might understand and reduce to terms defined. Vast and immeasurable time and space, all so overwhelmingly designed. Like the birds whose patterns grace the sky and carry all who join in love expanding, the message of peace will rise in flight, taking the weight of the world upon its wings in the oneness of everything. Songs of lives long past that touch our own are written in the earth, ever giving. And now to maintain the harmony gives to us all lives worth living. for the oneness of everything. Oh, passing years, just might I know the faith that winters in the heart to be reborn in spring, to hear and to feel the pulse of life enters my soul as a song to sing of the oneness of everything.
Class is the last great taboo in the United States. Even in this period of growing economic inequality, we hardly ever talk about class. Sometimes I think of class as our collective national family secret. And as any therapist will tell you, family secrets are problematic. Most of us believe that the United States is a classless society, one that is basically middle class, except for a few unfortunate poor people and some lucky rich ones. We have been taught from childhood myths and misconceptions about class mobility and the American dream. Many of us are confused about class and don't tend to think about it as consciously as we might our race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, or sexual orientation. Nonetheless, our class identity has a huge impact on every aspect of our lives, from parenting style to how we speak, and from what we dare to dream to the likelihood we will spend time in prison, from how we spend our days to how many days we have. This is the reading. Class lives.
So when Kate suggested that I talk about class, because she knew what I was doing these days, I hadn't actually written a sermon yet about class. I've been doing the work for a couple of years, but I hadn't written a sermon. Now I'm trying to figure out what to call it. And I came up with this idea of calling it Coming Out of the Class Closet. So I need to acknowledge, I look up coming out, closet, and the concept of coming out of the closet is not actually original to the gay and lesbian movement back in the day, but we certainly did a lot to publicize it. And so I want to acknowledge the whole LGBTQ community and thank them for this concept of coming out of a closet. I actually have an alternative title as well, which I think plays pretty well in this group too. What's class got to do with it? So, sometimes I just can't make up my mind. Whether we realize it or not, we are all aware of class and affected by it. Most of us don't know this, however, because our society and most of the groups we participate in either actively deny the existence of class or discount its importance. If I'm successful here today, you will leave with a new awareness of class, both in your own lives and in the groups you are part of, like this congregation. And like Kimo said, we, not Kimo, no, what's it? Garrett, this is not Kimo, this is Garrett. Oh, shoot. See what I get for trying to, oh dear. A big faux pas here, sorry. I thought you looked different, but I wasn't Anyway, when we change the way we look at things, we see things differently. That's the point. And that's really what I'm trying to do, both with this sermon, but also in a more detailed way in the workshops we do in class conversations. But talking about class, because we're not used to doing it, and because it has a lot of sensitive areas that it brings up, is risky. So this is, I think, part of the reason that we've avoided it. So part of our goal in class conversations is to make it safe to talk about class, and we realize that one way that we can do that is by doing it within a covenanted community, within a sense of we are all part of the beloved community, and therefore we can make certain agreements, like to listen to each other without judgment, and to realize that our experiences will be different, and not to unless we have people's permission to do it. So these are some of the things that help us to create a safe space for talking about class. So I'm going to actually invite you in a minute to share a story, so I'd like to have your agreement that unless you get permission from the person, you would not share it with anyone else. Okay? Sound like a possible? Yes. Okay, good. Like the fish that doesn't realize it's swimming in water, we're so embedded in class that most people can't see it. At least we don't think we see it. I contend that we all know much more about class than we realize. So I want to invite you for a moment to turn to another person that's sitting near you, whether you know them or not, and just take a moment to share with them the first time you became aware of class differences. Now, you might not have called it class, but you noticed something about somebody else who had more or less than you. So if you each take a minute just to share a brief memory. And if you're not sitting next to anyone, you can get like 3 people together if you want to. Okay? If you haven't switched persons, please do. Okay, would you wind up your conversations? And please feel free to continue later. So, what sort of things did you notice that made you aware of some kind of difference in possibly related to class?
Both John's and my story both had to do with race.
So race was connected with class in your experience. What else?
Social status.
Social status, okay. What else? Money.
Where one lives, whether you're living in senior housing or affordable housing.
Okay, where one lives.
Public assistance.
Public assistance.
Mindset.
Mindset.
Education.
Education.
Profession.
Profession. Okay, all of these things are indicators of class. In the workshops that we do with UU congregations and organizations, we've been doing them around the country, and if you look at our website, uuconversations.org, you'll see that we have 2 workshops coming up in the Boston area, as well as workshops in Michigan and New Mexico. But we keep announcing new ones as they get planned. But we do a lot more with the indicators and talking about that, and then we give a definition of class that's kind of a summary of that. And the definition we use is relative social rank in terms of income, wealth, education, status, and or power. Class is not just how much money you make or how much wealth you have accumulated, although that's certainly an important element. But as you noted, there are many other ways that we see class. Some people start in one class and experience others as their lives unfold. However, we find that even changed class later on, our class backgrounds influence who we are now. And whatever your class situation was at around ages 10 to 12 is likely to have shaped your self-understanding and worldview, as well as your attitudes about class, your own class, and others. Because these attitudes are part of who we are and how we perceive the world, ignoring them keeps us from fully knowing ourselves and understanding others. That's one of the reasons it's important to talk about. One of the creators of Class Conversations, Betsy Leander Wright, recently published a new book with an intriguing title. It's called Missing Class. And the subtitle explains what she means. Strengthening social movements by seeing class cultures. Seeing class cultures. She demonstrates that failing to see class cultures keeps social justice groups from being as effective as they might be in doing the work that they're trying to do. I'm doing this work on class because I believe that as a faith community, we can live our UU principles more fully if we are aware of class cultures and make sure that our congregations and programs are class inclusive. Now, I told you this was a coming out story, so some of us learn to see class at an early age, and this is my story. In my case, I began to be aware of class differences at age 7, when our family moved from an urban neighborhood in Southern California to the suburbs. Because it was the middle of the year, I had to complete 2 readers and 2 workbooks on my own to catch up with my new 2nd grade class. My parents explained that the new school was much better than the old school, and that's why they were further ahead. Fortunately, I like to read, so I enjoyed the transition. But this idea that one school was better than another, that's kind of weird to me, it seemed at the time. Before long, I became aware of other differences. We lived across the street from this elementary school, on the edge of a neighborhood that went up into the hills that had all single-family homes and yards. But our street, the street across the street from the school, had apartments. And my parents had, in fact, built a house that had a rental unit on the front. And that was how we were going to afford to live in this upwardly mobile neighborhood and go to the good school. Most of my friends had their own rooms, while I had to share with my younger sister. Some of them even had swimming pools. Our street was different, and there were no kids on it except for me and my siblings. Also, my mother had a full-time job, unlike all the other mothers, all of them, who were homemakers and volunteers. My friends went shopping for new clothes each year before school started. This was a big deal in California because the colors changed. And my mother took us to sales whenever they were happened during the year, and we got last year's styles or the year before's and all those old colors. So I never felt like I quite fit in. Their families took vacations to interesting places. We drove up north to visit family. Coming back to school after Christmas was one of the worst times, because the others talked about all these things they got. And all I could say was, well, I got a new nightgown, and maybe a small doll or a game. In 6th grade world history, we had studied the Russian Revolution, believe it or not, and the topic of class came up, class struggle. I went home and asked my parents, what class are we? I don't remember ever getting an answer. Later, I came to identify my class background as lower middle class. My father's family was solidly working class, whereas my mother's was more middle class or trying to be. But our family never actually moved up out of that sort of lower middle class status, as many people did in those days. Part of my particular class culture, though, it turns out, is the ability to see class, because all this time I was noticing class. Because we're kind of in between, one foot in class, 1 foot in middle class, I saw the differences. I saw the differences in my parents' families and in the environment that I was in. My ticket to the middle class was education. My mother, not my father, but my mother, expected me to go to college. And I kind of got the word that that was going to be a state college, because in those days in California, it cost practically nothing other than living expenses. And that was all my parents could afford. But other kids in my high school were all, the ones of us that got good grades, were all being encouraged to look at the private, independent, small colleges that were in our area and also elsewhere. And so I went on a couple of trips with some of them, and I fell in love with Pomona College. And I knew I couldn't go there. I knew it wasn't possible. And then at the last minute, I got a scholarship. And I got to go to my dream school. And that was really wonderful. And it really changed my life. But once I was there, I noticed even more class differences. Only 1/10 of the students, I found out later, were on scholarships. And some of the others were really quite wealthy. Some had gone to private schools all their lives, and they were as far ahead of me as I had been of my 2nd grade class. Or as my 2nd grade class was of me. But there was no quick way for me. I couldn't just read a few workbooks and to catch up. So I realized I wasn't going to be an A student as I had been in high school. But and knowing that I didn't have access to the advantages and material things that most of the other students had, it really did get to me. It made me feel inferior. I often wondered if I belonged there, but I wasn't going to give it up either. I knew it was a privilege to be there, and so I was determined to make it. And I got an excellent education. Years later, that diploma from Pomona, even with only a B average, got me into Harvard Divinity School when a couple of my friends didn't get in. And I know it had to do with that. Elite college I went to. One of the things we've learned in doing the workshops is that each class has different strengths and limitations. Both strengths and limitations. Everybody, all the way up the scale, everybody has both strengths that they gain from their class background and limitations. And this is a big part of our workshops, is sharing that, getting people into groups with that have similar class backgrounds, and they talk with each other and they come up with some of their commonalities and then share them with the other groups. So we have a wonderful opportunity of cross-class dialogues. And we've been doing this only in UU congregations, by the way. And one of the things we found out is that we have a much broader representation of class in our congregations than a lot of people acknowledge, or when they talk about us, what they say. So that's another part of what we're trying to bring out. So one of the things that I have to do in the process of this is to think about, well, what did I gain from my class background? And I realized that I gained a lot from not getting all the advantages that I thought I should. For one thing, my working class father taught me to keep track of money and how to live within my means and to figure out ways to make ends meet. Now, on the other hand, my middle class mother believed that if we wanted something to happen, we could make it happen. And she was always able to find money. And guess what? My parents argued a lot about money. But I also got both sides. I learned how to dream big and initiate projects that I believed were important, and I learned how to find money, mostly by writing grants and asking for donations. And that's how I funded a big part of my community ministry, including my work with Class Conversations. But doing so has meant that I have to be careful with money and live modestly, and I'm lucky to be able to do it. So although I didn't appreciate it at the time, I'm now grateful for the skills and attitudes I learned by being raised lower middle class. Coming to terms with class can be an important aspect of our spiritual journeys as well. First of all, becoming aware of our class backgrounds and how they affect who we are means becoming aware not only of how we see ourselves, but how other people might perceive us. And when we share this kind of thing with each other, then we can really deepen our understanding of each other and how we're different and how we're the same. And one of our steering committee members had these necklaces made that say, "My class story matters." So I always wear it when I'm doing class work because I think our stories do matter. Coming out about class means it kind of requires us to come to terms with our own past and also acknowledge the difficulties as well as what we learn from our experiences. And this means addressing what we call internalized classism. Some of you are undoubtedly familiar with internalized homophobia. Did you ever talk about that? You know, and today we've got still got gay youth who are growing up and feeling so terrible about themselves that they just can't live any longer. And that's the worst kind of internalized oppression. But we need to change the outer world, but we also, at the same part, in order to do this work and really come to terms with our class backgrounds, we need to learn about our own, how we've sort of taken on the judgments of other people as making the way we do things negative. And so I'm going to give you an example of this, because when we do this, we start thinking of ourselves in the same negative way that other people may have given us feedback or told us was, something that, well, you shouldn't act like that. And so we tend to do a lot of self-recriminations about, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But sometimes these things are just part of our background and part of who we are in terms of class. And in that case, maybe it's not so bad if we're going to learn how to accept each other. So here's my story about what I do that kind of bugs people sometimes that are from different classes. My family, my father's family was very expressive. They talked loudly, they all talked at once, and they all spoke their mind, and if they didn't like what you were wearing, they told it to you right up front. And you never had to worry about what anybody was thinking because you knew it, because they told you. Well, I can be this way sometimes. And it hasn't always won me friends and allowed me to influence people, what they say. So I can get very excited and passionate about something, and I can just blurt out something that I think is true, even though it might not be the most gentle, politically correct way to say it. And I can argue. I tend to argue when I don't think someone's hearing me. So this, especially middle and upper middle class people, tend to get very upset with me, and they will tell me that I'm just being too argumentative or too expressive, or impolite. And so that's made me feel really bad about myself, and I used to rehearse over and over again. You ever do that? You do something and it doesn't turn out too well, and then you go over and over again in your mind and imagine you could have said something different. Anyway, I used to be really good at that. I hardly do that anymore, because one of the things I realized is that it's part of who I am, so I can forgive myself. If I offended somebody, I can apologize and move on. And so in working with, if I'm in a group where I'm working with upper middle class people, I usually tell them up front that this is how I do things sometimes, and that it doesn't mean I don't want to hear their ideas. I just want to be sure they hear my ideas, and then I can listen to their ideas. And so I encourage them to be forthright with their ideas. And if they disagree with me, they disagree with me. That's just fine. I'm not offended by disagreement. I actually kind of like it. But some people think that's not a good thing. So it works, it helps a group when you can be upfront about these kinds of things. And then it also helps me slow down and be patient, because I know they understand. And so that's part of coming out about class. Okay, our society is full of messages about class. And we have a lot of and assumptions that we make about class. And this is part of the problem that has led us down the path that we're on to such incredible income inequality, income and wealth inequality. So you might not think you have these prejudices, but a lot of people do, and these kind of assumptions of people have shaped our public policy, and in order to change them, we have to really identify them and then unpack them. But it also gets in our way of relating with people from different classes if we have these assumptions and we let them get to us. And we carry them with us into hearing, let's say, someone else's class story. So probably the most prejudices are against people who are poor and people who are rich. And sometimes people think of poor people as being lazy or uneducated or making poor choices. But then sometimes they also pity them. Well, the pity is just as much of a problem in terms of a real relationship as it is if you think they're lazy and stupid. With rich people, you might think of them as, well, they create jobs, they are pillars of society, or just that they're incredibly lucky or talented. Or you can think that they're, you could demonize them, like the Occupy movement tended to do. The 1%. Well, if you actually met someone from the 1% and you were talking about class, how would it be to talk with them if you are carrying any of these kinds of prejudgments? So it's really a challenge to hear from people of different classes and hear their perspectives, both what they gain from their class background and what they have to share with a group, but also their limitations, their pain of their situation. So it's very important to keep an open mind and be able to hear each other. And that's what I want to encourage you to do. The reading this morning represented the persistent belief that we have a classless society. We have this belief that anyone who works hard can succeed. And what we don't realize is how much the world has changed in the last, especially the last 30, 40 years. People now growing up in poverty are, it's almost impossible for them to get out of poverty. The odds are they will live in poverty all of their lives. We don't have this same land of opportunity that we used to have. We have an incredibly skewed concept of who are the rich or poor. And we also have a skewed concept of what the wealth distribution in this society is. When people are asked to estimate what they think it is, they know that some people have way more money than others, but they don't know how much more and how much people, really, the bottom 80% are all bunched together now. And it's a struggle. And so coming to terms with that is important too. Part of this reality of escalating inequality is why UUs chose this as our study action for the next 4 years. And understanding class is a component of that study because these stereotypes about different classes undergird the public policies that we want to get changed. So we have learned, because we've learned that all classes have strengths and limitations, we have really begun to imagine what it would be like to have a class, not only a class inclusive, but a class diverse Unitarian Universalism. And I want to ask you to join me in that vision. You may or may not be ready for this. You may not want to do it yet, but I want you to think about it. What it would be like if we had a greater variety of classes, not only in our congregations, but also obviously in our congregations. And we really had a lot of dialogue about that, how much more closely we could be living our UU principles. And in case you think it's an unrealistic vision, I'd like to just remind you that there was a time, even in this congregation, when being gay or lesbian was not acceptable. It was a long time ago, okay? But it was a reality. And that has changed so much in this world that we now don't even think too much about LGBTQ ministers, which I don't think anybody could have conceived years ago. So we have managed to change things. And if we decide we want to do it, we could change things again. We're about to sing about love as a bridge. Love breaks the walls of gender, language, gender, class, and age. Love gives us wings to slip the bars of every cage. So I invite you to consider working together to make sure all are welcome here, and that we have a Unitarian Universalism that truly lives our principles. Thank you.